Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. This is actually a presentation that we did at World Workplace in San Antonio back in October. So all of our names are up there. However, we also have Noel McNulty, who's another facility manager at a law firm, who is not able to participate with us. So unfortunately, he's not there. A little bit about me. I currently work at Troutman Sanders, as Anthony said. 12 or 13 years in facility management. I got my master's degree from Georgia Tech. And actually, the Georgia Tech people are here if you want to talk to them about getting your master's in facility management. And I just completed a project to sublease 23,000 square feet of space to another law firm and have lived with it for a little while. So we'll be able to talk about that a little bit in this presentation. Shannon?
My name is Shannon Karasiewicz. I work with Earthlink. Prior to Earthlink, I worked over at Turner Properties. I don't know if you're familiar, over at the Techwood campus. And it truly is a campus. So I've got various building type experiences, from ice rinks to office space to data centers, studios, you name it. So I know all the facilities, customers and aggravations, and pros and cons to all those types of facilities, and all the hurdles that you face in managing those and subleasing those.
I'm Dan Walther with Elevon. We're in the Concourse office complex. We have 3 floors, about 115,000 square feet right now. But my experience with subleasing is with a former company. We had subleased about 200,000 square feet, so our broker had told us at one point we were one of the largest landlords in Atlanta. However, that wasn't our core business. So as it kind of connects to this presentation, we've got some good information to help you all out with.
We're really going to start off just talking a little bit about the facility manager's traditional role, which is very different from that of a property manager, usually. Typically, a facility manager manages facilities as an expense. So our organizations are usually not looking at their buildings as a profit center. And even if you happen to be using the building to offset some of that cost, the bottom line is that you're in business to do something else, and that building is taking up money that could be used for other things that support your core business. And we're usually in the role of a tenant or assuming the responsibility for an owner-occupied building. When you sublease space, this does change the dynamic of that whole thing, and kind of puts it on its head a little bit. Suddenly you're managing space to basically try to recover some of your costs, and while not exactly being a profit center for the company, you're also trying to mitigate the cost as much as possible. And a lot of facility managers aren't initially used to that role of having to deal with a tenant on the other side, and sometimes there's smaller tenants who may need a lot of hand-holding, and that can be a challenge for all of us. And I think when we've talked about it, it has been in general. So the next slide is about reasons for subleasing, and I just wanted to. We'll probably talk a little bit about it. I know in the case of my organization that I'm with currently, and the one I was with before when I worked with Shannon, currently market conditions changed and the way law is done changed. So while we leased a lot of space back in 2006, thinking our law firm was going to look a certain way, suddenly the recession happened and the way that people practice law changed, and we didn't need all that space. And we spent the past few years, 2009, 2010, 2011, kind of moving people, consolidating people onto floors, trying to free up floors so that we could market them for sublease. And since our lease is through 2020, that's a lot of money that you're spending for space that you don't need. So our goal was to basically market the space, and even if we get a loss for it, we've still already written off that cost. So we would be able to make back some of that and basically make the hurt of not occupying that space hurt a little bit less. Shannon, do you want to talk about Earthlink's series of subleases?
Yes, I think as Joseph mentioned during the recession, I'm sure a lot of you experienced your own businesses reducing their footprint. We certainly did. We occupied the entire building, I think, when you were there, and then when we went through our downsizing, we went up to one floor. Now we're on the upswing again, and we were successful in getting some tenants in there. Had a lot of challenges as at the time we really needed to get the space sublet, but it's like selling your house. There was a lot of concessions that they were really wanting and asking for. And so we found ourselves being more accommodating so that we could make that sublet happen, and that was what was, most successful. So the challenges that we had, we initially had companies that would come in, and of course companies now wanted everybody together. So everybody had to be on one floor. They didn't want to share a floor with anyone else, and that makes it more difficult to sublet those spaces if you're only subletting, half of a floor.
Didn't you guys also, like, part of the reason that you were subleasing was you acquired a bunch of little companies,
right,
and then you had to shut down their offices, and then you had all ththese little spaces all over the place?
Right. So and so that's the challenge that we have now, is we had downsized to 2 or 3 locations, which is great. You only have to deal with 2 or 3 landlords. Now we have about, I don't know, I could be off 10 or 12 spaces here, but I'd say about 115 sites. So every landlord's different. So every security system is different. And nowadays everyone seems to think, well, if it's technology, then we should only walk around with 1 access card. Why do we have to, walk around with 10? And so we get all those questions. I'm sure that most of you have faced with, your customers complaining that they're having to carry, or your subtenants complaining that they're having to carry a parking card and a card for their floor and a card for their building. And all the different companies, and trying to get everyone on the same platform, and it's just it's impossible in some cases to do with that many sites. So we do have a lot of challenges, but I think now what we're finding is anything is possible. Back when we used to sublet, there was a standard, there was a way that we always did it. Now folks are getting more creative in the lease negotiations and with their concessions, which makes things a little bit more attractive. And I think that's kind of given the industry a little bit of a shift to see that we don't have to do the standard, that we can hop outside the box to accommodate our tenants and still recoup the costs that we're looking for too.
Dan, you had a really interesting story too.
It's pretty much the basic economy 101. When 2008 hit and the economy started tanking, it affected our business so much so that the 17 floors that we had across both towers at King and Queen, we had to start subleasing because our internal activities reduced. We didn't need as many people. We didn't need the seats they were sitting in. So we go to market and we start to sublease. So it was pretty basic and pretty core at that, but we were fortunate enough to sublease 3 floors to a major tenant of ours for the remainder of our lease, which was another 12 years. And then we found another large tenant who took 4 floors and for the remainder of the lease. The rest of what we had was starting to divvy out in little pockets. You have to match some of the other tenants who are looking for not a whole floor of 20,000 plus square feet, but just maybe 5,000 square feet. You start talking about building a decommissioning wall, and you're moving maybe some fire sprinklers and security, carpet, electrical work, and it all starts building up. So it becomes difficult when you start slicing and dicing it out to fit for the needs for people walking in and looking at the space that they're in the market to rent at a decent price.
So, it works best if they take your space with as little change as possible. Otherwise, what you can offer them starts going down really quickly, right? Well, in terms of making the business case for this, there's a lot of things to look at. The market rates here in Atlanta, the market, as you heard earlier when Kevin Johnson was talking, there's a lot of vacancy on the market. And so in a lot of cases, and this is true in the sublease that we recently did, you're competing with the landlord to get your space done. The good thing is you can offer a really good discount. I mean, the bad thing is most companies that are subleasing are probably not going to, like we were talking about just a minute ago, volunteer to do a whole huge, rip out the interior and put in a whole new space, because the economics start looking bad that way. One thing I'll say, because he's not here, but I think it was interesting, and we kind of need to think about this too. On the other side, sometimes you need a sublease, and the market is a lot better from a landlord perspective than it is right now. We had people in our session who are from Canada who were talking about the fact that they doubled the amount of rent they had coming in because there was such a tight real estate market. And the other guy who was on our panel, Noel, he's in San Francisco. They also have a tight real estate market, and were able to really recoup the costs of what they had. So, but you need to know what the market rates are and then kind of figure out, does it make sense for you to go through this effort? There's different things that you can look at. Noel, again, had executive suites that they offered, which in my firm does this in New York, where maybe they give access to a certain area of your building and build out little suites that are shared among all the different subtenants. It can be a challenging environment because then you have people who are, you've got to kind of intervene among all these people who are sharing a common space. So if one guy's having loud conference calls with his door open, you've got to come down there and tell them, hey, you need to keep it down, there's other people around, close your door, which, you'd have more of a support system. It's kind of a different conversation when it's an employee versus a subtenant. You also need to look at your master lease clauses. Does your landlord get a cut of what you bring in? So I think this is maybe a bigger issue if you're renting for more than what you have. You're renting the space for more than what you're actually paying for it. A lot of leases have a clause saying that you have to give the landlord some percentage of that. And then, Dan, do you want to talk about rate of return?
The rate of return is a recovery rate that business leadership was very interested in knowing what that rate was. So you're paying X amount for your rent, and when you go to market and you're going to have some proposals for running the space that you have on the market, it's that loss perspective that it's a percentage. And what my manager is looking at, the director of finance, was what is that recovery rate? What is that percentage? How much are we losing? So when you look at that, it's something that your broker can help you with because they're looking at the cost analysis. You can request that as well. And that can help break it down in some numbers or some spreadsheets as well that you don't really have to create, but you can leverage that resource, your broker, to help you with that. So, as an FM, you start learning a little bit more about what all that is. And for a director of finance and the business leaders, they get to see what their loss is and calculate it into a bigger spreadsheet that's for the organization as a whole. But
can I ask a question to the audience here? How many of your divisions report into your company's finance division, or do they report into another division? Do most of you report into the finance division if you're in facilities?
I think in my organization, it's actually HR that we report up through, but I know that a lot do report through finance. and sometimes operations.
Who's in a sublease situation right now? Anybody? Are you the sub-landlord or the sub-tenant?
I'm the sub-landlord.
Sub-landlord. You are too? Over here? It's fun situation to be in, isn't it?
Well, we had in our last time we did this, we actually had a few people who were subtenants who had, gave their own 2 cents about the thing too. But it is a challenging thing. One other thing when you're making the business case and really deciding whether or not this is something that you want to do, you need to make sure that you look at the cost of actually just terminating the lease and walking away. Sometimes you're on the hook for the entire amount, so it doesn't, there's no benefit to that. But if you've only got a year and a half left, and you can be out of the space and just pay and go away, that might be a lot better than trying to market the space. At some point, it's not going to be worth it. So. And just to say also, since Shannon and Dan, we're asking you guys questions, feel free to ask questions if they come up, if you have anything as we go.
I had a question.
Yeah.
How much more attractive is it if you sublease a space that's already furnished? What would you say percentage?
It really depends. The question was, because we have to repeat it for the video recording. The question was, how attractive does having a furnished space make the sublease position? I think it can make a difference to have the furnished space, but at the same time, it really depends on the space. We had, and if you're in a law firm, it's maybe a little bit of a different situation because of the way you've got these secretarial carrels built out everywhere, and the firm that moved in, they had a much denser population, so they ripped all of those out and put in long cubes everywhere. I know Earthlink did use that as a marketing tool.
Well,
right?
I know Earthlink does, but I was talking to CBRE the other day, who manages our building. We have the restaurant downstairs that they've been trying to sublet for a long time, and it was marketed, emptied out, still looked like a restaurant. And after speaking with him, because I noticed there was construction, they were tearing everything down. Now there seems to be this trend of folks just want to see a clean, empty slate. You don't necessarily have to have it marketed as what it was before. They just want to know the basics of it. Is it stub for plumbing in certain areas, but just clean walls, clean floor, or even an unfinished clean space, which back years ago they did want to see the cubicles. I think now you could just have just as much success walking into an area where there was no cubicles, but it was just carpet and walls.
Well, I would say go ahead, Harry.
I think it really depends on who your potential subtenant market is. Who are you going after as a potential subtenant on the one hand? And because some subtenants would find furnishings in place to be a great advantage. They can move in more quickly, it's already set up. Others, as you said, would not. And it also depends on the condition of the space. If it's, I saw the word sparkle up there or whatever, if it's relatively new space and in really good shape versus space that's old and tired. Mm-hmm. Because if it's old and tired and in need of renovation, having furniture in place is probably not going to be an advantage.
It was helpful for us when we rented out the 7 floors. It's there, it's an asset, it's built, which comes at a cost. It's powered, it's networked, it's cabled. So all those things, if you don't have it, those come at a big cost for a potential client, tenant, subtenant. But like you can have somebody else walk in and say, I don't like this at all. I want to bring in our own furniture. So I know we have another slide about that.
Well, actually, and this is part of the marketing process too, and I think it's important to. I think both things are right. Like sometimes the subtenant's not going to want the furniture. Sometimes they will. I think in most cases, from a sub-landlord perspective, it makes sense to leave what you have there. And a lot of times, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Subtenants might be smaller organizations. They may not have anyone in facilities or real estate who can really envision what the space is going to be like. If you've got the furniture in there and it's set up, and even if they don't want the furniture, at least they can kind of start thinking, oh, this is how I could use this. You know, it gives them a frame to view it in. The other reason not to remove furniture is, why go to the expense before you know what they're going to want? I mean, it's not, if you can get someone to take the furniture, and Jahan Span, who's sitting there, who works with me, managed to get a great deal for someone to come and actually take all those built secretarial stations that we have, which I thought we were going to have to pay someone to take and break apart. You know, if you can get someone to do that, that's great, but the truth is, it could be very expensive to get rid of furniture. So I'd put the cost of doing that off as far as possible and use it to kind of stage the space. The other thing is, you know, if you are marketing the space to try to make it sparkle, and those of you in property management probably do that all the time, but you know, every time we would bring someone through our space, you know, half an hour before, we were going through turning on all the lights, make sure all the windows are you know, completely raised so you could see the views, which are the big selling point. If there's smudges on the windows, making sure that those are wiped down ahead of time. You know, you don't want to do a whole lot in this space, but you really do want to make sure that you're showing off its best features. Dan, do you want to talk about any marketing stuff? Or?
A lot of marketing stuff, from my experience, wasn't so much showing a potential subtenant. Our broker really brought them in. So it was me more so managing the broker. Don't show them the fitness center because it's really for our associates. And though we did include it at $25 per person per month, it means now we're programming their access card, now we're chasing down a check, now we're taking all these extra steps. Plus we have more people in the fitness center, and that they're not our employees. So there's other things that you really have to consider, but what it really connects to is managing your broker. But the marketing spot of it, the space looked good. We did have furniture in there. We were trying to make sure that people were getting their own IDF closets built rather than using ours, because everything was terminated into our closet. So you've got phone, you've got network, power, and if you remove the furniture, sometimes it looks good, but it can also expose, you know, the carpet looks pretty bad now because in that high traffic area you can see it's built up. So a number of things you've got to consider with regards to leaving furniture, showing it, making it sparkle, showing all that. I'm hoping the broker was doing that for us, because in the towers at King and Queen, you do have some beautiful views. It's a nice place to be. So it was really helpful with the broker being there, and it was just a heads up for me to say that they're coming. Can we go see the space? Yeah, of course. Sometimes they're in a space for us that we already had some people there, so it was more so managing the number of people in their party and making sure that they were not being disruptive to the business that we had going on at that time. So,
and sometimes ease of use of the space is also a marketing thing. Is when you're showing the space, it's not just about the space. Parking, you know, that's always one of the first two questions that rolls out of somebody's mouth when they hit the floor. They look around, you don't know what they think about the space, but they're going, okay, so how many parking spaces are we going to get, and where is it located, and is it, you know, in the building? And they immediately jump into wanting to talk about the cost of it, because logistically they're thinking when they see the floor they're going to cram 150 people or so, and we're telling them, oh well, we're only going to be able to give you 85. So, and then you're marketing the MARTA station down the street. So those are other challenges that we faced.
Well, you know, once you've marketed the space and someone's actually interested, then you actually have to prepare the sublease. And I think when we were talking before, when we've talked about this, each place is a little bit different in how they do this. I know since I work at a law firm and we've got a bunch of real estate attorneys, we have a go-to guy who does it, although, you know, sometimes getting their attention can be a challenge, and you're working with a whole team of people to get this thing going, and then you've got to send it to the subtenant, and their legal has to go through it, and you kind of go back and forth. Dan, I know when you guys did it, it was mostly through the brokers, right?
Broker was very excellent resource in building and preparing the lease. Our internal resource that I went to and leveraged his expertise was our internal attorney. So leverage your resources for those expert areas that you may not be so versed at, and make sure they're covering the pertinent pieces. You're talking about certain things too that that refer to them using your data room or not, access to that data room and the timing, the security systems they're connected to or not, and if they are, what are those other detail pieces? So the devil is in the details, as they say. Know those things that really hit you and what you're gonna touch and work through with your subtenant after that's executed. So look for those things, but some of those detail areas that are numbers and all that, that's pretty much on the recovery rates and my director of finance. So all I would emphasize is make sure you're working with your broker, your attorney, and all of your resources, and the things that are really important to you as well. Make sure they're in there.
And be explicitly clear about the processes and the parts of the business that you will be able to provide some support. I know we've encountered where businesses would come in and they may have just had an administrative assistant, and that role ended up changing because the administrative assistant now had to be the point person, and it's now evolved into maybe an office management type position. And these are things that they need to consider, that we're not going to be the ones that are going to be communicating directly with your employees and tracking down parking cards and security access. There needs to be, or communication, through the building needs to come through that person, not from us, to you all. So otherwise, if you're not, and that verbiage in the lease supports that we're going to provide that support, now you've increased your workload by like 1,000. So,
well, I think you want to be very clear in the lease about how things have to be managed. It kind of leads into the next thing, which is dealing with property management, because on the other side, your lease says certain things about how you need to interact with the building, and that also covers your subtenants. So really looking through your master lease, seeing if there are any issues with subleasing at all. I know when we were going through the process over the summer, we actually needed to get approval from the landlord of our subtenant moving in. And you really, if you're trying to time this quickly too, you really need to know kind of what's going on with your building, because my building had just gone into receivership, and trying to get the owner's attention was a challenge. Then people at the bank were on vacation, so that could, if you're trying to get this done quickly, some of that stuff with the building can really push your start date on construction out. And you need to look at that risk and how comfortable you are with it. You don't want to do a lot of build out and take a lot of expense and then have the building come back and say, sorry, we weren't going to approve this sublease. Also kind of looking, I'd say one other thing that comes up, and this is something that we had to deal with the property management, was about just how to handle requests that come in. And I'm lucky that our landlord allows our subtenant to put in requests themselves, and then basically bills us, and then we bill them back for it. I have talked to people who have to be that conduit to the property manager, and that can really add a lot to your job, especially if you have a needy subtenant. You guys have any thoughts on dealing with property management?
I would recommend you align your subtenant directly to property management as fast as you can for these services that they will bill for. So they need extra keys, they need after-hour HVAC, other things that can come up. If you're that middle person, you're adding more things to your day to manage. If you can draw that straight line for your subtenant to billing management, and billing management back to them in the billing process, and payments are being made, you're pretty much out of the picture. And it's not fun to get the phone call that says, hey, XYZ subtenant of yours didn't pay these fees that go back 3 months, and now it's got your attention and you're having to deal with that. So those things can come up too, but for the most part, my experience has been align it right off the bat with them billing directly. I don't know if all property management organizations will do that. Fortunately, we had a property management company that would, and so we took advantage of that real fast. And as well as giving access to our subtenant to the ticketing system, that's an online system that property management puts on their website. Set that up real quick so that they can submit carpet stains, locks don't work, windows don't work, water coming in, plumbing problems, lighting problems, all these things. You can set them up, and you can even train them on that. You know, just give them that, you teach them how to fish, and you walk away. So the investment up front is quite valuable for you, because if you spend the time up front, you're going to get the return on investment in the back end.
Shannon, anything about property management?
I agree with everything he's just said.
Furniture, to Bob's question, you know, you do need to, and we talked a lot about this. I don't know if we've got a whole lot to say about it. You know, it can be a tool for staging and negotiating. I think the one thing that you need to keep in mind when you are marketing this space is, okay, in the back of your head, because when we were marketing the space, I mean, we spent 1.5 years doing it. I never quite let go of this. At any minute, I might have to get rid of all this furniture, and how are we gonna get rid of it? What items are we gonna keep if they don't want it? You know, you're just constantly thinking about it. Obviously, furniture liquidators are a great resource. It all depends on what they actually need at a given time. You know, when I was at Earthlink, big part of my job the last year I was there was closing down offices in different cities, and bribing them with something that they really wanted was a good way to get the rest of this junk they didn't want taken out. So we had a lot of Aeron chairs, and those were what they knew they could make money off of, so they basically hauled the rest of our furniture to the dump. So, you know.
That's what we did too.
Yeah, I think it's the Earthlink strategy at that
Right.
point. So
If there's something they really want, they can come get it, but they have to take everything else, you know, which now there's such a surplus of used office furniture that I don't even know where they're keeping it and how in the world they're.
Well, typically they don't hold on to it a whole lot because they bring it into their warehouse. Furniture liquidators like to have a buyer before they'll even accept it, because, you know, they basically don't want to hold on to it at all. They want to move it from a truck to the new place it's going. So if you can find that, it's good, but you call around too, because you might get no offers from anyone, and then one guy might be the one who's like, yeah, I'll give you $5,000 for it because he needs it right then.
We also, to our employees, we had communicated to them that we had a floor that we were liquidating a lot of items, and had coordinated if they had a church or a school that they wanted to donate to, you know, to contact us. We had them walk through the floor, we tagged it, had them sign certain waivers and proper documentation that was required by our company, and then would give them a letter, and then they had to arrange to come pick it up. Of course, you know, you have to get into the certificates of insurance and all that, but we had so much stuff that it was worth doing that. So in that process, we were able to donate a lot of nice items to schools, and some churches, and it was amazing how many people took it. And then we also had another area where we had things that were gently used but still good, and if employees wanted to buy them at a discount, it could be, you know, break room refrigerators and coffee, then coffee makers and stuff. And so we made, you know, a few few grand, but it was a few grand we were able to just throw back into the facilities budget. So, and again, that goes back to just creative ways of liquidating and getting rid of, and then contacting recycling, metal recycling places for the cube walls. I think with the metal, that was a big thing for a while, and so if you get all those vendors out and it's fairly organized, you can liquidate pretty quickly. But just look for the most creative ways to get rid of the junk, so to speak.
I think too that when you're in a furniture mode and the first bullet, do they want it? It's blend that into the lease. When do they own it? And if they're coterminous with your term lease, they're going to pick up the last 5 years of your lease. They'll own the furniture at the tail end of the lease. If they own the furniture right off the bat, they get to sell it, and then then they may leave in a year's time, and you're looking at it going, why did we do that?
Or if you have to evict them, you don't want to have to worry about their property. You want to just get it out of there.
So when you're do they want the furniture? Make sure you're factoring that into the lease in a proper way. If they don't want it, like Joseph said, call a lot of people who are liquidators, because one of them may have that customer who's looking for that specific chair, and you've got 300 of them, and they're going to give you, $70-$80 for a chair, whereby the next person's only going to give you $5 or $10. So you're better off contacting as many as you can, and you'll be able and give yourself as much time as you can as well, because the more you pin yourself into a short time frame, you're losing a lot of opportunities.
And the other subtenants too. Sometimes your other subtenants, I don't know how the other subtenants found out. I guess word just flew around the building, and we had our other subtenants contacting us saying, hey, I heard you were getting rid of all these, and these were things that we thought no one's going to want this stuff, and they were down there buying all the conference room chairs, and so it worked out well at the time.
I will say personally, I'm not a huge fan of liquidating to employees for a whole host of administrative reasons. It's like actually dealing with the sale itself. Okay, well that's not that hard. But then how do they get the furniture out of there? A lot of times they end up just keeping it at the office, and you've still got the furniture hanging around waiting for them to pick it up. And
I agree with you. There are liability issues. They bring their brother-in-law. They ding up the walls, taking it out. They've got a bad back the next day, and is it workers' comp?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of liability issues you need to understand before you start selling to them.
I agree with that too. And when you were explaining what you all did for your employees, it was a real win for them. So I kind of chalk it under the morale side of things, with all your time and efforts to make sure that everybody did it in a real good, proper, safe way. And there was really a win for them.
We did have to get them to sign on forms and whatnot, so it did take some coordination. Absolutely.
for the money you guys made, I'm sure you probably expended a lot more people's time in managing that.
It wasn't, at the time we were downsizing, so it wasn't like there was a huge amount, and the deals were so good that it was more a lot of one-offs, so it wasn't as difficult as it was. There was, except for the church donations, having to get that certificate of insurance and stuff, that was a little bit difficult.
Well, the next topic is security, and actually this is kind of Shannon's baby. But one thing I wanted to just mention a little bit, because Noel's not here. There are a lot of security issues with having a subtenant in your space. Initially, I think you need to look at it really if you've got a suite situation and they're sharing your space, there are a lot of potential security issues there. So you want to be concerned about that, and what kind of access they have to your people, and how your people are talking, in front of these non-employees. There are a lot of potential liability issues to that. So I just wanted to throw that little piece in there. But Shannon, do you want to talk about some of the security issues you guys have faced?
Well, in a perfect world, we'd like to occupy the whole building and deal with, one company, one system, and that's obviously has been a challenge. So in all the different sites that we have, and one of the things that we've been tasked with since we acquired a few companies is integrating security systems. And this is not a situation where we own all the sites. Out of the 115, we only own a very small handful of those spaces. So it's easy to go into the location, the Earthlink space, and badge it and get the access set up, but then we also have the landlords. So the landlords are all on different systems. And sometimes they switch those systems after you've already installed a system that made sense to be more compatible with theirs, and there's just no way to avoid it. It is a huge, huge undertaking to try to get all that on board. I still don't know, if there will ever see a day where our employees will walk around, employees that visit every site and will carry only one card, one universal card. That's something that we try to work towards. In our own building here in Atlanta, we do have subtenants. One of the things that's worked out great is upon marketing the space, and then when they come into the space, is we typically have the badge readers already there, but they're deprogrammed. We recommend the vendor and why it's good to use the same vendor. And so it's worked out to where all of our subtenants use the same vendor that we use, so he's familiar with all the systems in the building and what the access and who's where. So it has worked out easy in that sense.
Do you maintain access to all of your space and then ask the subtenant to give you a badge for their space?
Yes. So we do have access into their space. However, I think recently what we have done is try to channel that through our building manager. So where you have cards to check out so that you can kind of record and understand who's exactly going into that space. There's still challenges. We have moments where people lose their cards and then they're contacting us, and you feel like you almost need another staff to manage it. But again, one of the things I encourage is if you are marketing the space and if you're exiting the space, leave your badge readers in place. This is what I've found. Leave them in place and just deprogram them and just remove that line off your systems. A lot of what I think we've been successful in getting some spaces, tenants in the spaces, is because it's already there, and because they do want to do a quick move, and it does save them a little bit of money, and the vendor's already there, and it's almost to them like flipping a switch. So that is definitely a recommendation. And then to try to tie, if you've got remote sites all over the place, now there's different technologies where you can integrate those systems and view them remotely, making it a little bit easier. So that's the easy part. It's the end user result that's been a little bit of the challenge. It's just carrying different cards.
Dan, do you have any?
I agree with what Shannon is sharing here. I think leave the card readers, and in most cases, if it's a whole space and it's a separate facility, and you leave all that for them, fine. But if it's multi-floors and they're connected to your system, in best practices, I think it's best to have them connect to their own DVRs, their own system, that they're maintaining that whole security system. They're creating badges, they're turning them on, they're turning them off. If you get to a spot where you are going to leave the card readers there because it's on a wall and it looks good, and you don't want to have to go back and try to match the paint or the wall covering, just leave it there. But you might consider pulling the cameras out if you've got some up there, because they may or may not use it. It does have a dollar value to you and where you're using your cameras at. So you might factor that in as well.
Well, and we're a little crunched for time because we started late, and we've talked a lot about living with subtenants day to day throughout this conversation, and some of these points we've already discussed. In terms of the fact that a lot of the smaller organizations probably don't have a facility management group. They may not be able to handle projects on their own. and they'll really try to rely a lot on your organization if you let them. And there's a balancing act there in terms of how far you want to work with them to help them, because you don't want to just let them go. You want to provide good customer service, but again, back to putting it in the lease about how you're going to treat that. Sometimes you've got subtenants who are in a remote site, which can be a challenge, and you have subtenants that are far away from you, right? Mm-hmm. How hard is it for them to get? Do they call you guys a lot to actually get help for particular issues they're having with the building, or do they tend to be more directly involved with property management?
Some sites, they're more directly involved. Some sites, they call us because we've either already kind of integrated them onto our system, so they have to call us. But they also, we're trying to centralize, if most of you have ever been through mergers and acquisitions, you try to centralize everything once the dust settles into one person so that you see what kind of requests you've got out there. We try to minimize a lot of the landlord having a lot of our employees contacting them. We do find that wears the landlord down.
Well, are the subtenants contacting you?
The subtenants. So we basically try to pick up where those little gaps, but almost every site is different. We're trying to get to the point where we maintain a standard, and it's very difficult because of long-term relationships we've had in that region with that particular.
Anything about living with subtenants?
I will say that, and I'll connect it to the keynote speaker, Kevin Johnson, this morning with Invest Atlanta. He was talking about the available space here in Atlanta. In October, AJC front page, October 19th, Friday, 24% available space downtown, 16% available space Buckhead. That's the same number that Kevin said this morning in the keynote session. So when you're marketing space and your subtenants coming and you got them signed up, I look at it as they're your customer. Love your customer. Take care of them as best you can. You have to manage your time best with what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. But spend time to get to know them, reinforce some of the boundaries that you have to do, that you have to reinforce. You're going to handhold them sometimes. Sometimes you're going to steer them to the right person to talk to, whether that's property management, a broker, or some other resource. But they're your customers, so take care of them. It's a tough market out there.
And then we have a slide here on moving out, which you really want to manage the process so that there's no risk to you in exiting your lease. So if your subtenant lease expires, you just want to make sure that you've got enough time to get them out of there so that you aren't going to be liable for holdover in your own lease. And whether you do that by making sure they're out like a month before you need them out, or if you trust them enough to make sure that they're out at the time, but have the language to make sure that they're liable, but ultimately you're liable. So you just want to make sure that you're very aware of that. And if there happens to be an eviction process, and you dealt with eviction, right?
We did. We again, still your customer to the very end, but know on a legal basis when you can enter the space and when you cannot. Because as an FM, you want to make sure that, is my AV equipment walking out that they didn't pay for? That what about this other gear, furniture and assets? When somebody's not paying their bill, their rent, you're thinking, what else is happening? You don't know. You do want to get your eyes on it, and you do want to enter. It's just human nature. But know when and when you cannot enter the space. So check with your attorney. Research it, Google it, find out what you can do.
Well, we've gone through a presentation. We kind of sped through a little bit of it, but we just wanted to see, are there any questions? Yes, Laura.
Have y'all had any success with being able to go direct to the landlord so that we don't have to be subtenants? What's y'all's experience been in that area?
repeat the question?
Have you been able to go direct to the landlord so that you bring the subtenant to the table and then turn it over to the landlord, they work out a direct lease and you're done?
You know, that's really one of the options up front when you're determining whether or not you're going to turn the space back into property management or sublease it. Because if you turn it back in, you're liable for rent payments all the way to the end of your term lease.
I think Laurie's saying find someone and then have them take over your obligation. I think no, because typically the people that you're looking for who are potential subtenants, they're not going to have as good of a credit record as you are. So I think landlords typically reserve the right to do that, but there's going to be very few cases where, you know, an organization that has, you know, 350,000 square feet or whatever is going to be a worse credit risk than, you know, the little organization that wants to move into your space as is. So I know it happens, but we haven't been able to do that.
It's a great scenario. It's a great option to exercise right up front. And it is property management and it is the subtenants. So the three of you together get together. And it happened for us in our Salt Lake City site. We had a number of floors. We had another 5 years. We're closing down, but we had a subtenant, potential subtenant, who said, hey, we're interested. Let's all come to the table and figure out how we can do this. We still came out of pocket $400,000+. They signed the lease. We terminated ours, and now we're out of the picture. We're no longer a tenant there who is also a sub-landlord.
You know, it
worked out well.
I'd look at like blend and extend too. You know, like you have to give the landlord something. So maybe if they're willing to add another 7 years onto the term for your, I don't know how much time you've got on that lease, but if they added, you know, some significant amount, it could potentially lure the landlord.